psychologist for about 25 years. She has presented at every ISSBD African Regional Workshop in the past decade. So she has all the experience. Maybe I need to tell you also that when she came, she also brought some important material for us to use here. There are some textbooks on developmental psychology and also some test material. And actually we could give a purpose. Right. So today should be introducing an idea that developmental scientists need to become familiar with, because she's a developmental psychologist, but then she has branched off to developmental science, not just developmental psychology, which is actually multidisciplinary, where we bring scholars from other disciplines who also talk actually about development. So that we can become familiar with implementation science in order to maximize their effectiveness. So I think without much ado, I have the pleasure of inviting Prof. Robinson in front to give a presentation. While he's giving her another pom-pom. If we forget her name, it's actually only a scarf.
So this is an unscheduled talk. I will talk with you about what I'm meant to be talking about on another day. But I thought that while we were here, we might use the time productively. And so this is me trying to introduce an idea that is often not on the curriculum at universities yet, which I think is going to be really important for Africa in the next decade or two. So I'm going to be talking about how you can make the research that you do, whether it's at an undergraduate level, a master's level, or in a doctorate, as effective as it can be. And I'm going to use two concepts called knowledge translation and implementation science to try to explain that. So, depending upon how easily it is for the conference organisers to bring all the things together, despite the many challenges they face, I will be talking to you about 1, 2, or 3 things today. I will stop when everyone else is here. Yeah? But we're going to get through at least the first one, and that's going to be to explain to you why you would ever think that understanding implementation science might be important for you and for your institution and for your country. So I'm going to be talking about the why. I may also get to talk about the what and the how, and I might actually get to the end, but we'll see. But just for the moment, my question is, why are we all here? I mean, why are we sitting in this room? Why are we doing the courses that we're doing? And sometimes it's just, oh, it seems like an interesting career that pays okay. And other times it's, I want to contribute to the development of my country. And other times it's, this is a very people-oriented career and I'd like to be involved with people. Sometimes it's about, this is knowledge that will benefit humanity. And sometimes it's about knowledge because I'm interested in generating knowledge for its own sake. So people are in this room for a variety of very different reasons, but all of them, I would say, might be related to what I'm going to talk about. So, why are we here? We have 3 different arms to developmental science. One of them are the knowledge generators. They're the researchers. Then there are the policy makers who are making decisions about the lives of children, families, older people in the community. They work in public service, they work in non-government agencies, they work for the United Nations. And then there are the people who are in professional practice. They're the clinical psychologists, they're the teachers, they're the special educators. They're the people who are actually working with families and with children. And all of those people can benefit and contribute to improved knowledge, skills, economic productivity and equity in their societies if we're all working together towards a common goal. But often, today, we're all doing quite different things. We don't necessarily talk to one another very much, we have different language, and we're not necessarily benefiting from the skills that each other have. So we're going to talk about something called the no-do gap. And this means that there is knowledge out there held by each of these groups of people, practitioners, policymakers and researchers, that could really benefit the others in that triangle that are not being used. So we talk about in the West things that knowledge is in silos, that is, researchers talk to one another and they read each other's work, but they don't necessarily talk to policymakers who talk to others in their area, and professionals also talk to people in their area and rarely across these different boundaries. And so when researchers publish things in journals that are often international, what are the chances that a policymaker will ever see that research? What is the chance that a teacher who's practicing in rural Zimbabwe will ever see that research? And so researchers say, but we have a solution for that. We've had a solution for 10 years. And people say, I didn't know. Okay, so we're going to talk about how it is that we overcome the difference between what we know and what we do. The second problem is that if you get the information to the practitioners from researchers into the avenue of policymakers and professional practice, or if you get professional practice people to be able to give their concerns back to researchers, you end up with a problem, which is that when they go to use research, it doesn't work. Or at least it doesn't work the way it's advertised to work. So we're going to deal with each of these problems in turn. The first problem, I didn't know, and the second problem, it doesn't work when I do know it. So let's talk about the first one, which is, I didn't know. When the researcher says, but we know about this, we know the factors that influence it, we have an intervention that we know is effective, and practitioners and policymakers say, I don't know. So the problem is that around the world, and including in Zimbabwe, huge amounts of educational research, agricultural research, psychological research and health research are demanding lots and lots of money. So the world is investing in knowledge creation on a huge scale, and it's effective. We have generated enormous amounts of knowledge that have the potential to improve human lives. The problem is that the day-to-day practices of policymakers and practitioners in these fields largely remains unchanged. But there's also the problem that policymakers are generating policies that have the potential to improve human lives, and researchers are not going out and evaluating them or contributing to their development in the way that they might. And so those policies are less effective than they might be. And in terms of practice, we also have that practitioners know what the problems are in their classrooms, know what the problems are that their clients are bringing to a therapy session, but that often isn't feeding back into, we need research about what's effective in our context for this problem. Yeah? So we have skills and knowledge held by practitioners, held by policymakers, held by researchers, but there are barriers to us effectively using that knowledge. So I'm going to give you an example. It's a kind of very far out there example, but it's a bit extreme, and that's why I like it. It should get the message across very quickly. So there is a disease called scurvy, which is caused by a lack of vitamin C. And in fact, in Africa, there are still communities that are severely affected by scurvy. But I'm not going to talk about Africa for the moment. I'm going to talk about history. The first team to go around the world and prove once and for all that the globe is a circle, a sphere, was Ferdinand Magellan. He did it a long time ago. But one of the things that most people don't learn in the history books at school is that 80% of his crew died on the way. And it wasn't because people were throwing rocks at them, or worse. Most of them died of scurvy. So just to give you an idea, scurvy is a problem that affects almost every organ in the body. You know that it's happening because your teeth hurt and then your teeth start falling out. You have very pale skin, your eyes begin to sink into your body and you become extremely unwell and incapacitated. Now it turns out that because this was affecting a lot of people in Europe, in Asia, around the world, and because it was affecting sailors, and sailing was to do with conquering the world at that time, a lot of energy went into trying to find what is the cause of this and how can we fix it. So in 1747, James Lind, who is now still famous as the person who solved this problem, successfully trialled testing the effects of citrus fruit on scurvy. He proved that this was highly effective in both preventing scurvy from ever developing and if people had scurvy, in helping them to recover. He did that in 1747, and he presented his work at the Royal Society in London. It took him another 6 years before he could get the book published, so that it could be out there so that people who weren't a member of the Royal Society might actually be able to see it. And from this day forward, to the day he died, he knocked on the door of the British Navy saying, "You have thousands of people dying every year and I can fix it. I can solve it for you." And do you know how long it took them to listen? It took them 48 years before someone went, "Maybe we should do something about this. I think there's a guy who's got the answer. Let's try citrus fruit." So during that 48 years, tens of thousands of British, French, Dutch, Portuguese, Arabic, Chinese sailors died because the answer was there, but no one was using it. And hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people in communities all over the world were dying from the same disease. And that knowledge could have helped all of them. He died in frustration, never knowing that just 1 year after his death, finally someone was going to do something. So not only does it take an enormous amount of time usually for a piece of knowledge to get from a researcher into a policymaker and then to a practitioner, it also is the case that most of the research that we do that has the possibility of benefiting humanity is never, ever taken up by the people who could benefit from it. It's estimated that only 14% of potentially beneficial research is ever implemented. And the average time for implementation is around 17 years. So if you think about this, the time it gets from your research to a policymaker or a practitioner to actually do something in a classroom or with a group of people who are facing a mental health problem or whatever the issue is, a health problem, whatever it is around 17 years. And in that 17 years, people continue to suffer or be disadvantaged or be marginalised. And it's not okay. So we need to work out why the system that we've got now isn't working. So there's three main reasons. One is something that's called reach. That means if I publish something, no matter how famous the journal is, the chances are that there's not a teacher on the planet who's reading it, right? So it's about reach. How far does my message go when I send it out? Does it get to the people it needs to get to? How many of them does it get to? Where does it go? The second thing is that even if I was able to get my message into the hands of everyone who needed it, the chances are that I'm talking developmental psychology talk and they're a classroom teacher. And we don't talk the same language, and I don't necessarily understand how I can present my information in a form that they go, that's absolutely relevant to me. I know what to do in my class tomorrow. I'm going to start doing it, and I know what resources I need, and I can get them. Does that make sense? So the idea is that I need to get the information to the people who need it, and I need to deliver it in a form that they can understand and implement. But then there are a whole lot of other things that are also important. And they're all the stuff that's involved with how you implement change effectively. So what we've got is that knowledge translation is about getting your information to the people who need it. If you're a practitioner, it's about getting the information to policymakers and researchers. If you're a researcher, it's about getting it to practitioners and policymakers. About getting your information to the people who need it in a form that they can understand and in a form which is relevant for them and where they know what they need to do on a practical level in order to implement that knowledge. Implementation science is the bit about all the other factors that are going to stop them being effective in doing this and how you can address that so that together you can make sure that the people who need to benefit actually get the benefit. So what I'm going to talk with you about now is going beyond these very theoretical kinds of ideas that I've just given you and say, what does this look like when you actually do it? So this is an example of knowledge translation. It's from India. It's called Super Amma, which simply means super mum. So it's going to be talking about getting mums to see themselves as super mums for doing a particular thing. And this is the problem. Contact with contaminated environments, from toileting, from having animals, household animals, and from changing babies' clothing after soiling, leads to germs on people's hands, especially mothers' hands that are involved with food preparation. It's then transferred to surfaces in the house, to skin, and to food, and that causes ill health and is a major cause of child mortality. We know this. We have known this for a very long time. We've also known that there is actually a very simple solution, and that is thorough washing of your hands with soap after you've been exposed to contaminants will get rid of this problem almost 100%. But the trick is that millions of dollars around the world, including in Africa, have been spent in public health campaigns trying to get people to wash their hands, and they have, in the main, spectacularly failed. Even when you provide families with free soap, even when clean water is available, and for most people in the world, there is no soap and readily available, and there is no clean water readily available, but even when those two things are there, people don't do the hand washing. So we have a problem. How are we going to solve this? Yeah? What are all the different things that would stop someone saying, now these are not stupid people. They know that their children are dying and children in the village around them are dying. This is not okay with them. They want to do something that can affect this, that can stop this. And yet when you tell them the answer, somehow or other all the consequences that you would expect from that do not flow. So one answer is the knowledge being translated into a form which is acceptable and relevant and easy to implement for the people who you're targeting? And this is then working out, so Super Armour is based upon evidence. It's an evidence-based way forward, and they said, first of all, we need to look at the beliefs that people have about what makes children sick, what germs or dirt are. Then we need to look at the emotional responses that people have. We need to look at what other people in their environment are doing. And that hopefully can generate a desire to change what you're doing in order to achieve your outcome, which is to have healthy kids. And then we need something to help them actually do it. Now, if you think, where have I heard that before? And you are a student of psychology, this big literature search that they did that worked out what sorts of things made a difference to whether or not people changed their hand-washing behaviour is actually just Asian and Fishbone's theory of planned behaviour, where you've got cognition plus affect plus social norms lead to an intention to change behaviour, which, if there are no contextual constraints on stopping you doing that, can lead to a behaviour change. So this is what Super Armour worked out. They had to work out whose behaviour do you need to change? And they went, we need to change the mother's behaviour straight away, and to make a change that lasts into the next generation, we should actually try to change the behaviour of children. Yeah? And the children also in India eat with their hands, and so the children could also be contaminating their own food. So we need, if we're going to reduce child mortality from diarrheal disease in particular, we're going to need to get the children to wash their hands and the mothers to wash their hands at an absolute minimum. Yes, fathers, aunts, grandmothers if we can get them, but these three are the non-negotiables. And we have to work out what mothers' beliefs are. And they then discovered, by going in and doing community consultation, which someone should have done in the last 30 years, it would have saved them millions of dollars, and they discovered that the mothers in the Indian villages always washed their hands when they're about to go and prepare food, when they could see that their hands were dirty from agriculture, yeah, or from killing the chicken, or from doing something else. But 30 years of intervention had failed to convince them that there are invisible germs, yes, microscopic germs. And no amount of taking microscopes or showing them photographs or doing anything else convinces them that invisible germs exist. So you are just not doing good knowledge translation if you keep trying to go against a firmly held community belief that if something is dirty, you can see it. They also found out from going in and doing community consultation, which would have been a good thing 30 years ago, that what mothers' goals were. And so you're going to try to align your program with what mothers want to achieve. Your thing as an intervention person in developmental science is to say, how can I help the audience I want to attract achieve their goals using my knowledge? And they worked out that although, of course, health was very important to children when you, for mothers, when you ask them, what are the goals that you want? Indian mums wanted their child to be economically successful. They also wanted them to be socially successful. They wanted them to make good marriages, they wanted them to have friends, they wanted them to be contributing to the nation, they wanted them to be economically self-sufficient. And surprisingly to the researchers, when you asked mothers, what is it that your child will need in order to achieve all of that, they did not say a good education, they did not say good morals, they did not say a good relationship with their God, they said they will need good manners. It's an interesting answer. And so the researchers said, okay, so in order to be effective, we're going to have to link what we want to economic success, social success, via good manners. That's what it's going to take to do knowledge translation in this context. They also said, what does it take for children to change their behaviour? And they found that, well, what the children wanted to do was they like to master new things. You know, you give a child a ball and they want to work out what they can do with it and to get better at it. So they wanted mastery and they liked praise for being really good at things. And the second thing that they wanted was to avoid things that disgusted them, right? They're not unusual things. You're attracted to behaviours that are going to lead to praise and mastery, and you avoid behaviours that lead to disgust and shame. So we're going to try to use those motivators that are already in the population, that is our audience, to try to make a change. And I want to show you how they did it. And we believe this will work. Could you just check the volume for me? hope you understood what was happening then, because what they were doing was giving the impression that everyone in the village was doing it. They took videos of all the people in the village washing their hands and saying how important it was to wash hands, and then they screened those video clips to the village at night, because they don't have television, so everyone came out to watch what was going to be on the big screen. The children don't have access to lollies, to candy, to sugar. And so the children really like it when someone comes to the village and offers them pieces of lollies, of sugar candy. But did you see what they did when the man who put his hands down his underpants and then wiped his nose offered them candy? They all went, ooh! So they're generating this notion of the idea that if you don't wash hands, it's extremely rude. It's a common courtesy, it's good manners to always wash your hands before you'd sit down to dinner. It would be good manners for you to wash your hands after using the toilet before you shook hands with someone else or touched something in the house. And so they're linking all the things that motivate children and all the things that motivate parents to the notion of what they are trying to achieve, which is to save the children's lives by stopping diarrheal disease, by getting people to wash their hands. Does that make sense? So they had to completely transform their message from what they would have done as a scientist. You know, as a scientist, you would not go, oh, about good manners and helping you become economically successful and all of this sort of stuff, or causing disgust in children. But what they needed to do in order to reach this audience was to translate it into things which were relevant for the audience and deliver it to them in a form, video, which didn't require any reading by people who had low literacy, that involved people who they knew and respected, and they had this notion of that huge eye. Did you see the eye? The eye is posted all around the village. We're watching you. It will be noticed if you don't wash your hands. Yeah? It will be considered, you'll be judged to be discourteous, to have poor manners if you do this. So, all of these reminder messages are posted around the village and remain there after the intervention is finished, because it only takes 2 days. Okay, the second problem is that if they start to do the things, if you actually achieve the behavioural change, the people, the practitioners and the policymakers come back to you as a researcher and say, it doesn't work. We did all of that work, we changed everyone's habits, and it didn't deliver the outcome that you promised. And this is a common problem. The benefits promised by research or promised by a policy that the government institutes are often far greater than the actual benefits that the people on the ground see when it's implemented. So what can account for that? There are 3 different kinds of things. There are efficacy studies, which are often done at universities, where they say, or at a university hospital, and they say, well, if we get people to do this, does it work? And then there's effectiveness studies, which take it out of that very controlled environment and say, well, what do ordinary people do if we do it on one level? And then there's implementation studies, which are about what would happen if this was scaled up, and what are the factors that would influence whether it worked or not. What have we got to build into the program in order to get those gains that we're promising? So this is going back to my scurvy example, an example of the gap between what was promised and what people actually saw. So remember again that it's to do with a deficit in vitamin C in your diet. So to prevent vitamin C, eventually in the 19th century, British sailors were given a compulsory daily allowance of citrus fruit. That is, whether you like citrus fruit or oranges, lemons, limes, whether you liked it or not, you were given a ration of this which you were expected to eat. But scurvy continued. Yeah? It was less, but it continued. So what happened? What happened was that the Spanish owned most of the land, or occupied at least, most of the land where oranges were easy to grow. What the British occupied was spaces where people grew limes. And so instead of saying, Lynn's data said the best thing, the most effective thing is oranges, the British went, we can't start importing millions of oranges, otherwise someone will know that something's up, and we're going to treat this as a military secret. So we're going to get the limes secretly from the Caribbean, which we occupy, and we're going to use limes. Now the problem is that the limes that they get from the Caribbean are lousy for vitamin C. They've got 1/4 of the vitamin C that an average orange will have. And so they were trying to use this. So the first thing is, it's called lack of fidelity. Someone tells you oranges work and you say, oh, oranges are vaguely related to limes. Let me use limes instead because it's more convenient, or it's cheaper, or it's something else. So it's a lack of truthfulness, it's a lack of fidelity to the research that persuaded you to make a difference to begin with. And the second thing is that the people you're trying to benefit will often sabotage your efforts to help them. So, and that's because you haven't gone in and prepared them for why change is necessary, that the change is going to be easy for them to make, that it could be delicious in this particular case, all of those sorts of things. So sailors who were dying and who were angry about the number of their comrades who died on every voyage actively sabotaged their own well-being. Because the government, in order to try to keep the limes safe, you know, these trips on sailing boats went for months and months, and an orange or a lime would go mouldy and it was no good. So they pickled them. And no one in Europe had ever eaten a pickled lime before, and it was not pleasant. These days, you have to pay top dollar for pickled limes at Fordham and Mason's or something else in London, but at the time they were introduced, this was a crazy food that they were offering you, and they were making you eat it. That's two things you don't want to do. Something that seems really a big ask for people, and something that they really... Anyway. Also, people saw them eating limes, and that they had to eat limes. I don't know whether you are familiar with this, but British people today are still known as limeys in some contexts, and it's a derogatory term, and it comes from this compulsion that the sailors that people met as they travelled around the world knew that they had to eat these horrible things every day, otherwise they were punished. So why aren't we any better at getting things right 200 years later? And it's because most of the research the research dollars go into developing the initiatives, finding the cure, finding the prevention, working out what the mechanism is, what the factors are that go into things, that almost nothing is spent on actually working out how to effectively implement the intervention that's needed. Does that make sense? Spend a lot of time on discovery, very little on how could you possibly make that work in the real world? What are all the barriers? What are the facilitators to actually making it work? So the nature and the quality of the implementation, it turns out, makes as much difference as the nature and quality of the intervention. Yep, you can have the most fantastic intervention, something that will save lives, that will prevent kids dropping out of school, that will do a whole bunch of things. But if it's badly implemented, you might as well not have had that knowledge on the way through. So we need to spend, as professionals, as researchers, as communities, as much effort trying to work out what can make this work and what can stop it from working, as we do on actually coming up with the intervention to begin with. Now, what implementation normally looks like when we do it today is it's kind of like project management. We say, well, first of all, we'd have to go to the minister and get approval, and then we'd go to the teachers' union and get approval from them, and then there's just a series of tasks that have to happen and the order in which they have to take place. And the problem is that we need to develop new ways of doing things in order to get knowledge into the professional practice of researchers, policymakers, practitioners, and to benefit the people we're ultimately working for. So I'm going to give you another demonstration, again from South Asia, about oral rehydration therapy. Who knows about oral rehydration therapy? About these little salts that you give for kids with diarrhea. There's one of the simplest, cheapest, life-saving interventions that's ever been developed. Okay? We're going to look at where it was developed and how even in the country where it was developed and best known, it failed spectacularly at the beginning. So this is the guy who invented oral rehydration therapy coming up. So this was published in 1968.
If you ever had the opportunity to see a patient in shock due to cholera get that first liter of intravenous fluid and come back from death to life, it looks miraculous. My name is Dr. David Mallon, and I led the team that carried out the first successful trial of modern oral rehydration and maintenance therapy in former East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. Intravenous therapy was used to save lives, but of course it was nowhere available in the majority of the affected areas, which were largely rural villages with no medical support. I had an epiphany in which I still remember I felt a chill down my spine. Followed the basic rule of replacing the losses with equal volumes of a matching but absorbable solution with glucose. You meet many people who they say, oh, it saved my little child's life, it saved my brother's life. I remember in Nepal where oral rehydration therapy is called Jivan Jo, which means life water in Nepalese. And that's one of the most gratifying things, to see that it has gone through the stage of clinical research and reached the very people we wanted it to reach, the mothers of infants with diarrhea in the developing world.
So what could possibly go wrong with that story? So it turns out that in fact Bangladesh is underwater for half the year due to flooding. It's very, very flat. And it means that even if you can have these little sachets available at a local health clinic, even if there's not really a medically trained person there, people can't get to them. And people also are a bit suspicious about what these little, what looks like salt, could possibly do for their babies. And so this is the problem.
Ever had the opportunity to see a patient in shock due to cholera get...
My problem. So this is how oral rehydration therapy failed and then actually got going in Bangladesh.
Every household in Bangladesh has all these three ingredients. depend on outside supply in order to address or cure your children's diarrhea. So we work with international sort of experts on that and decided to make that knowledge available to every mother in Bangladesh. So over 10 years, we have reached every household in Bangladesh and taught one women from each household how to make this solution. Now, just providing the knowledge is not enough. We found that the mothers were capable of preparing a safe and effective solution. But then we did a survey to find out how many are using it. And to our dismay and frustration, we found that only about 10% of the mothers were using it. The rest 90% are not using it. And that was quite a frustration for us because we thought that if you provide the knowledge to others for a disease which their children are facing almost every day, they will start using. But they are not even using that.
Did you get to the bottom of why that was?
That's right. So we commissioned a large number of studies, anthropological studies, to find out what is going on. Why is this no-do gap? It is a huge gap. 100% were able to prepare a solution, but only 10% are using it. So we found several problems with our own design. So one was that the workers that we trained, we found that they themselves were not very convinced about the efficacy of the solution, that a solution with salt and sugar can cure a disease like diarrhea. So themselves were not convinced. So if they are not convinced, how they can convince mothers? So what we did was that we brought the workers to Dhaka. Dhaka has an international center on diarrheal diseases, and then put them through a process of training to show them that how ORT works. And then they went back and they started teaching again, and then this time they were more convinced. So the use rate went up from 10% to 18%. But it was not enough, of course. So we started doing other research. And another result we found was that the problem was more of a women-to-women problem. So the health workers to women and the mothers who have been taught, they're also women. But we found that the men were kept out of the program. But in our society, men are the decision makers. So even though the women are convinced about the efficacy of that, the women will not use unless the men tell them to do so. So that was another learning, that you have to involve men in this. And we recruited new men worker, for example, to talk to the men and go to the mosque, go to the school, go to the bazaars, and talk about ORT. So all these were done over the years. And I'm very happy to tell you that now Bangladesh has the highest ORT use rate in the world. More than 80% of the mothers are now using it when their children have diarrhea. So this is the kind of a learning and doing thing, and all our programs are done like that we learn from our own experience and then we scale up.
Okay, so you got the idea that everyone went, we must, and this is a story that has played out with other interventions in Africa. You guys have learnt this also, that when you need to change women's behaviour, if you're living in a patriarchal society, you've got to get the men on board. You can't just go to the women and try to convince them that they need to change behaviour, because the women will not feel that they have the authority to change the traditional way of dealing with things unless the menfolk in their lives give them the authority to make that decision. So this is a story, again, about, just to assess what he said, because I know his accent was quite difficult sometimes. They had, at the beginning, less than 10% of people were using oral rehydration therapy, even though all the ingredients that were necessary were in their homes. So they addressed the cost, they addressed the accessibility, they increased the number of people who knew how to do it, but it still only got to about 10%. And this is what he said: we tested the mothers. 100% of the mothers we trained could make oral rehydration therapy in their own homes with things that they had, and 10% of them, only 10% of them used it when their child had diarrheal disease. Then they addressed the trainer's belief and confidence in what they were teaching and increased the mother's confidence that they could actually make a difference in their children's health. And it went up to 18%. I mean, it's nearly double, but that's still, you're not going to save a whole lot of lives that way. It was the fathers and, what's not there, the mother-in-laws. The fathers and the mother-in-laws had to be convinced that this would work and had to give women the permission to change the traditional things that they'd always done when the kids had diarrheal disease and instead do this thing. And now they've got the highest rate of use in the world, which is approaching 90%. Does that make sense? So this is about how you implement them. And this whole part of this talk is about why you would do it, why you would think that as a researcher or a policymaker or a practitioner, you needed to understand something about why we're not as effective at making the benefits for our nations and our families come to pass when we have the answer in our hand. Yep. So this is the end of my first presentation, which is about why you would bother. And the second one is about how you do it. But I'm going to wait until we work out whether there's time to do that before I proceed. So that's the end of part one. Yes, so I'm not going anywhere. But, I'm willing to take, I'm happy to take questions, comments, criticisms, anything you want.
Right, that's the end of your presentation. Can we give a pam more applause? Right. Question? Any question, please? How many minutes we have? Two. Questions?
Thank you, Julie. That was wonderful. I really learned a lot from you this time and other times about implementation science. There is a little trick here. There is a little quandary here. How do you deal with when the most effective approach to implementation is kind of against your values and beliefs? So, for example, playing into the patriarchal society, where you go to the men even though you think women should be equal. I mean, that's an example. I mean, I completely agree that one should do that, but it's dicey. And how far do you go along that path?
So we could take another
Right.
question.
I can remember that one.
Thanks, Prof. Actually, it's not a question. Thanks for this eye-opening, groundbreaking research of yours. I just like to relate to the washing of the hands with soap. Just want to relate it to the South African context, because in South Africa, when we grew up, we had a series of cholera as well, and this washing your hand song was sang even on the media everywhere, but people didn't receive the message. And then the researchers said, okay, let's give it to the health department. And then they started doing a lot of campaigns. But even today, the message is not even well received. You go to public toilets, for example, when you're traveling, and you just say, okay, this is a one-stop area, restaurant, and everywhere you go to the toilet, you see even waitresses, they are wearing caps and what, and chefs. They'll go to the toilet and after that they will leave. And then you just ask yourself, look at this one. There are posters everywhere, wash your hands, and they are working with food. And the thought of saying, when I leave the bathroom, I need to buy something to eat, comes to your mind. And it's like, anyway, people are not getting it. And then this, the beliefs, I think for us is the myth. The myth of saying, there's this myth in South Africa that, because usually we have pigs, and then the pig say it's always dirty, wet, and mud, so the pig is always dirty. And then they will say, hi, that doesn't kill. If that indeed is killing people, the pigs will already be dead, some sort of things. And secondly, they relate dirty with success and cleanliness with laziness. So even if the child comes with dirty hands or poo and soil and whatever, and you say, hey, come let me watch, you say, hey, this one is going to be a very successful man. And if the child is clean and say, hey, you are always clean, you don't even play with soil, so you are going to be lazy. So I was relating, and it's really opened my eyes. Thank you so much, Prof.
Okay. That's interesting, Prof. Robinson.
Thank you, Prof, for interesting presentation. My question is on the knowledge generation which is taking place in institutions of higher learning, universities included. Developing countries, generally, they have these universities and researches which are going on. Some of them are quite excellent, but when you try to marry the researches and the industry, you find that there is a gap, that these two are completely divorced. The knowledge which is being generated in universities is not being implemented or applied. There is no application of that knowledge. What do you suggest could be done, particularly in developing countries? And if I can zero down to Zimbabwe, if you have an idea. Thank you.
Any other question before we give Prof. Robinson to react to those? Okay, you can read. But you know what she was talking about? Somebody who is so smart and clean, sometimes may be very difficult to put up with. That somebody who is or maybe that is dirty, clumsy. Never know.
So, Zelma, I'm going to start with you. And I think that when there are long-standing beliefs, proverbs, folklore, traditions, where the meaning of things is going against. So this is the idea that children get dirt on their hands because they're helping their father in the fields, or and the clean kid is not helping. So being industrious leads to you being dirty, and it's a kind of a signal that you are industrious. And also the notion that people will look at pigs and go, look how dirty pigs are. There's filth all around them, and yet they're healthy. So, of course, people can be the same. So I think that when you've got those kind of core beliefs, what knowledge translation says is, you've got to work within people's belief systems if you want them to receive the message. And so the question is about, in the second presentation, which is about how you do knowledge translation, which I can send you, about the importance of aligning the research within the belief systems of the person that you're working with. You can stretch that, you can challenge it to a certain extent, but you can't go too far, otherwise people cannot receive the message. And the reason I started with Zelma is because it relates to Tony's question as well,
Exactly.
which is that if you, your job is to be an effective communicator that leads to positive change in the world. Yep. And if we say a message that carries our own values, however much we love our own values and believe that they're the right ones, we need to respect the idea that other people do not always share all of those traditions and values. And that if we want to effectively communicate our message to them, we need to be able to work within their system. Yeah? And that means that if it's a patriarchal society and you want women to be able to use ORT to save their children when they have diarrhea or disease, you can do all of the women's empowerment and all that sort of stuff that you want, but unless you are willing to wait 20 years for generational change, it's unlikely that you will be saving the children's lives if you refuse to acknowledge that the men need to give permission. Now, that does not mean to say that there are not moral dilemmas at every step. You know, ethics is tricky in research and in policy and in practice. There are dilemmas that face us every day. And some of those are to do with when there are oppressive regimes at the government level, at a family level, at a cultural level, how much you're willing to help them with their agenda in order to achieve your own agenda. And you've got to, there's no straight answer about when you say, enough already, I'm not doing it. In terms of the research industry gap, this is not, you will understand, a problem unique to Zimbabwe or to Africa. There are tons and tons of ideas and innovations that are in the pilot stage in every country in the world that could make a difference to economic productivity, to the affordability of essential services for people in communities that are not being taken up by the people who would need to develop them into marketable or implementable kind of products. But knowledge translation, which is again in the second presentation, is about working out who are the change makers in industry, in local industry, whether it's at a particular factory or at a government level or at an industry group level. Who are the change makers? How can I get their ear? What is their agenda? How can I align what I have developed and what I think has the capacity to make a difference in the world, a positive difference in the world, to what they are trying to achieve? Are they trying to improve productivity, reduce labour costs? Are they trying to upskill their workers? Are they trying to break into a foreign market? Whatever it is that is their agenda, if you can align your innovation to them achieving their goals, you have a much greater chances of success of them being open to listening to your research idea. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there are a whole range of techniques that are used, they're technical techniques that are used in knowledge translation, and there is a centre, an African centre for knowledge translation. It's in Accra, Ghana. It focuses on the translation of health information from health researchers to practitioners and policymakers around Africa. But the principles that they've got are exactly the same principles that you use. I mean, they took them from other places. Those principles are exactly the things that you need to do for industry, for welfare systems, for health, for psychological research, for education. The principles remain the same. It's how you apply them that's a bit different depending upon the context of country and the context of the field. So I commend them to you. It's a free website. They've got lots of stuff on there that's useful. Thank you for listening. And I think that we have an announcement about what's going to happen next. Is that true?
Maybe we should have some questions. Maybe we should have some questions. Right, there's Dr. Chikoko there.
Thank you very much for the presentation. But one of the greatest challenge that we have this part of the world is that we tend to rely so much on Western-driven knowledge, concepts, and so forth. And when they are applied to the local realities, there are huge challenges.
Another comment or question? Maybe to follow up on Dr. Chikoko's question, Prof. Sebel, I have the privilege of having the mic. Maybe let me give you first, then I will have mine later.
No, finish what you were going to say. I mean,
Okay, that's fine. Well, I want to say, Prof. Robinson, Zimbabwe right now, particularly UZ, is now asking researchers to focus on what they now call Education 5.0 instead of Education 5.0.
Education 5.0.
Yes, instead of the traditional 3.0, where they will talk of only community service, research and teaching. Now they want academics to also focus on innovation and industrialization. Now when we're talking of development science, it seems to me that possibly that Education 5.0 motto can still be applicable, because maybe possibly people can also initiate innovative strategies actually to answer community problems, community challenges, which can also speak to community service.
Yes.
But possibly you could, because actually you're talking of the Knowledge Translation Center in Ghana. He had used it just last week. The president actually opened the Innovation Center. But the problem then is, most of it seems to be very relevant to technical fields. Technical fields. Engineering, medicine.
Oh, I see. Okay, yes.
Agriculture. Where humanities or developmental scientists possibly may feel or think that they are left out. Possibly your approach may be very relevant to us here, because you don't belong to those technical fields, which actually seem to be very, very relevant to the new model. Then, Prof. Sebel.
okay, thanks. I wanted to sort of build on the intervention from a gentleman behind me. I didn't catch your name, about the danger of depending on the Western world for solutions to our problems in Africa. I think the title of the field known as implementation science, it has this kind of linear metaphor that you start with scientific knowledge and then you go down a line. From there, how do I get this knowledge to people? And then from there, how do I get these people to use the knowledge? Because after all, the purpose of the knowledge was to bring about a change in the people. So it's the knowledge is coming, in the case of these biomedical interventions, to prevent diarrheal disease if you're talking about hand washing, or to treat diarrheal disease if you're talking about oral rehydration therapy. In both cases, the story is likened, as you put it, to the discovery that scurvy was a result of vitamin deficiency. And what I saw from the fine tuning of the linear model was that time and again it was a question of whether the people in a position to understand and use this knowledge in their own lives actually really felt a sense of ownership about this knowledge. And so when I talk to students about how to get psychology, which has also scientific ideas like biology does, the ones we've been looking at, how to get it to make a difference in people's lives. I think that was your title, to make a difference. I always say, well, if you're talking about babies around the world and young children, then they have people who, generally speaking, are in a position to do something about it. So if the oral rehydration is typically going to be administered by the mother, and you explained how really these mothers, even when they had been trained, again, the linear thing from outside, and behavior change was induced inside the community, that they needed to feel comfortable that the baby's father or the husband or the head of the family would be okay with them doing this with the family's baby. So it seems to me that part of the overall message to learn from these very nicely presented and well documented successful interventions worldwide to prevent diarrheal disease, which is, after all, it's a baby killer, and we know from the statistics that less babies die now from diarrheal disease than they used to. So it's a success story. But the part of what we need to learn from it is that it's not really about taking a clear body of knowledge and just making sure that people know it and decide to use it, but that they own it. So I like the concept of appropriation, to say that really our agenda as applied scientists, be it applied biologists or applied psychologists, is how can we facilitate the appropriation of what we've discovered, and not assume that the particular version that we have is 100% what we need. I think he was either Pakistani or Bangladeshi. The person who was being interviewed by a friend, the daughter of a friend of mine, Dr. Anyangwe's daughter, in the Guardian clip. He talked about the fact that early on, when ORS was, ORT, oral rehydration therapy, was being disseminated as a worldwide effective tradition, the World Health Organization started packaging ORS, and you actually had initially free, and then of course we know always that these free things eventually you end up having to pay for them, and you can buy these in chemists in Lusaka, and you probably can here in Harare too, little packets of ORS. But what he said was, we realized that actually there's nothing very magical about this. It doesn't need to be done in a factory, that actually what you need is a certain amount of sugar, a certain amount of salt in a certain amount of water, and that body of knowledge is sufficiently straightforward and non-complex that you can teach people to use it and to make their own ORS. And this is a bit like the business of, give a man some fish and he's got dinner tonight, teach a man to fish and he'll be able to feed his family forever. So I think that appropriation of ORS, the theme, as you know, we've had some very interesting successes in Zambia with children learning this and then becoming the agents of change in their families, because it doesn't cost anything. And in Harare these days, what something costs is a really big deal. It is in most parts of the world all the time, but it's particularly big in times of economic crisis like this. So, that was just my 2 cents on this question of, should we be getting the knowledge from outside, or maybe we get the idea, then we take ownership of it, and it's not their idea that we're importing, it's our idea, we own it. And that's how we're going to treat our babies.
So, going back to the first comment, one of the first steps in formal implementation science is community engagement. It's, what is the agenda? How important is this outcome for the people you're trying to, who you think could benefit? What are their priorities? What sorts of practices would be acceptable or unacceptable in that community? And so implementation science can't be done outside of context. It needs to be done with, what are the strengths in this community? What are the barriers? What are the facilitators for a particular change that you think has got the potential to benefit this community? And you don't take in something that the people think has got low priority. So for example, implementation scientists would say, We have wasted an enormous amount of money on mosquito prevention via nets for people who don't think that malaria is an enormous problem. Yeah, it's just part of what life brings. And unless you are working on something that the community wants, using methods that the community finds acceptable, culturally appropriate, affordable, all of those sorts of things, using knowledge translation techniques that are appropriate for that particular community, it won't work. And we have millions of dollars spent every year on things where people have not done knowledge translation appropriately. Does that make sense? So you would never take, people also kind of get the idea that the West is kind of monolithic and that what is developed in the United States is going to work in a country like Australia. And I've got to tell you, we have to change everything. Yeah, we have a different population mix than the United States. We have a different political context than the United States. Things that will work there won't work here. Things that will work here would never work there. So we need always, even though we're Western to Western, we've got to take everything and take it apart and put it back together again in a way that makes sense in our context before we can use it effectively. There's a problem is going to be greater for you. Yeah? And Robert Seppel, who's just over here, is actually very good at working out how you might make things appropriate to context and how you could look at your own context as a series of strengths and how could we use what is already here to achieve the end that we want. Yeah? Using the general concept but not the specifics. Education 5.0. Education 5.0. Psychology, education, I've got lots of applications that can change a country, that can save a lot of money, that can make a country much more economically productive. So we have things we can offer on all 5 of those dot points that you just read to me. It's harder to get people to listen when they want a new piece of equipment and what you're delivering for them is a new policy about literacy or a new policy about how to improve vocational outcomes for young people. But if you get to the top economist, they will realise that that will also save the economy an enormous amount of money and will also generate more economic productivity. So it's about finding the people who've got the ear for change and being able to sell your story to them in a way that fits what they're trying to achieve. I'm saying this over and over again. What is your audience trying to achieve? How can you align your innovation with what they're trying to achieve and present it in a way that they can see the relevance and see how they could benefit from it immediately. So I think that you've got fantastic opportunities at innovation, and I'm going to claim for you that you've got a chance to do the industrialisation thing as well. It's just a different kind of application to economic productivity than they might have thought of. Robert, I gave you some examples of top-down because I looked at the audience here as a group of researchers. But at the beginning, I tried to point out that there's a lot of things that researchers aren't necessarily receptive to information coming from practitioners or what policymakers need in order to inform in a culturally relevant, contextually relevant way what they could be doing to be most effective. And so these 3 different silos have all got knowledge, and the community itself, which was up there at one point, but which I didn't elaborate upon. The community has a sense about what knowledge it has, what resources it has, where it wants, what its top priorities are. And that information is critical for making knowledge translation and implementation science work. So for me, the beauty of implementation science, which I did not convey very effectively to you, my knowledge translation failed, was that the beauty of implementation science for me says, you've got to listen to the community about what it wants, what's acceptable, what resources and strengths it sees itself as having and how they might be able to be put there. It needs to work with the professional practitioners about what are the challenges in the classroom, in therapy, in industry that they're facing. The researchers need to be listening to this, the policymakers. So when it's done well, you have 4 different voices that are all working together for a common agenda. And the agenda is not specific. The agenda is we're going to try to save children's lives when they're affected by diarrheal disease. It's not even necessarily we're going to do it through oral rehydration therapy. Because if you were working with a community that said you can't put anything into a child's body when everything is going out of a child's body, you would have to come up with other ways of achieving that goal in a way that would be acceptable and receivable by the host community. So when it's done well, it's very contextually relevant, culturally relevant, listening to the many voices that are necessary to be incorporated in order for us to add to the sum of human happiness in the world. But I didn't do a good job.
Oh, you weren't speaking to me, you were speaking to all of us, right?
Yeah.
All the actors were great.
Tony, you had something. Am I filling in time? Is this a good thing for us to be spending time on?
That's wonderful.
I was just going to say that I think you underestimated the importance of one of the examples, which was when he talked about going from the pills to products that were in the household that each mother had. Not only is it cheaper, but it also takes away that foreignness of it. I mean, if some guy came in and gave me a bunch of pills to give my daughter or son, I mean, I'm not sure I'd go for that. But if I know I know what the ingredients are, and I'm told that this combination is going to be uniquely helpful, I'm much more likely. So in a way, that's another example of, I don't know whether you'd call it implementation or translational science, but it's a way to make the receiver more comfortable with what you're offering.
And the way implementation science and knowledge translation conceive of that is, what are the resources that this receiving community already have that we can capitalize upon? And that buys into a sense of ownership and appropriation as well. So what you're doing is also trying, in the best models of implementation science, not to see communities that are facing challenges as being in some way deficit because they're facing that challenge, but to see that there are resources, there is imagination and innovation and motivation to have the world a better place. There are resources that are in this community. They might look different from one person to another. So in one community, it might be that the way to get protein into children is to use animal products. Yeah. In another community, they're vegetarian. So how's that going to work? Yeah. If you're a Hindu community, you're not going to be eating meat. So you go, okay, meat's not going to work. Let's go in. What are the resources they've got? They've got beans and lentils. Let's go with that. Okay. Because there's more than one way to achieve the end in almost every case. Does that make sense? So it's about looking at communities, seeing the resourcefulness of the people, seeing the physical resources, the context that's there, and saying, how can we make this work for the benefit of that community so that they can achieve the goals that are a priority for them? And so we, the scientists, the policymakers, the practitioners, are seen as being agents to help communities make the changes that they want, rather than being an expert who comes in and tells them what to do. It's a different mindset. We are the servant of the people.
Thank you. Mine is mostly a comment, which will end most likely the question. I just want to comment on how amazed I am at how your presentation speaks to my thesis, which honestly I am currently struggling with. It's about investigating how action-oriented research can be used to bridge the gap between research and implementation. So I'm looking at how you've mentioned how the community is rich in knowledge itself, but I'm not sure, since I've only just been introduced to implementation science, where the collaboration between policymakers and implementers and on one side and researchers on the other side should begin. In the examples that you've given in your presentation, the collaboration is beginning after the research has already been done and knowledge has already been gained. And now what we're seeking is how to best implement the knowledge that we have gained. My thesis is looking at how perhaps there can be collaboration with policymakers and implementers, right from the beginning where we've got a problem that needs research in the first place. I looked at the example of Lind and the scurvy issue, where perhaps had he not stopped with clinical trials on his own and then intended to implement his knowledge, maybe had he involved the intended recipients of the knowledge in the research phase, where I'm also taking Tony's comment about how I would better receive research knowledge if I know what's in the tablets, in the pills that I'm being given. And one way to do that is to involve the community to say, okay, these are the ingredients that we need for you to, and what we're making is simply a combination, a concoction of these simple ingredients, and have implementation being more effective and better. So I really don't know what my question is, but maybe I'll say, what are your thoughts about action-oriented research helping implementation become more effective? And perhaps also to comment about Doc's comment on knowledge being Western and trying to implement it here. I feel that maybe action-oriented research could also assist with that, because we say we are going on the ground, we are involving the community which we intend to assist. We're not merely taking the knowledge that has been done by somebody else in the West. We are going into the community with the problem and utilizing the knowledge which exists already there and working together with the community to come up with a solution which is better received and also can be appropriated. That's the term you used. Appropriation of knowledge, because they are also part and parcel of making that solution. Thank you.
So there was a lot in there. So just, this is my own experience and it may not translate. My own experience is derived in my own research on refugee young people in Australia. And when large numbers of African refugees arrived in Australia for the first time, we had no precedent about that. And I was amazed at the number of, so we did a really odd thing. We just phoned the Ministry of Education, got put through to the people who work with people who've just arrived in our country to try to get them English language skills and get used to things, and said, would you like to meet? We're researchers who are interested in this area. And they said, yes. So there's often policymakers who would love to have a researcher who would listen to what they need, and practitioners who would love to have a researcher who would listen to what kind of information they would find useful. And so if it's this it's called co-production of knowledge. When you're looking it up, I can give you a PowerPoint presentation. I have one on co-production of knowledge as well. So you can look at co-production of knowledge between communities, policymakers, practitioners and researchers. And that's when you get the greatest uptake. because it's not just the community who wants something, who wants the teacher to do something. The teacher's on board, the community's on board, the government policymaker about that issue in education is on board. And so everything lines up so that you're all working in the same direction. Now, I'm not saying that that happens quickly. It took us a couple of years before we were able to get things to really move in the situation where I am, and it may take longer, it may take more perseverance in other contexts, I can't be sure. But it seems to me that it's absolutely true what you're talking about. Action research is often a question which is generated from policy or practice. It's going the other way. I focused on knowledge coming from the researchers to those who might be able to use it because this is a researcher audience. But if I needed to talk about exactly the same thing, implementation science, to practitioners, I would have it going the other way around. That is, I would just flip those bits and I would talk about and give examples that related to policy and how people in policy need to be active in trying to find researchers to collaborate with to address the information that they need. What you end up with is a kind of hybrid. The work that I did, we collected data which was of no theoretical interest to me, but which is what the policymakers needed. And was no theoretical interest to me, but is what the parents of the child refugees said that they needed. Yeah? And so I came up with this thing, and we gave the analysis of this bit to the policymakers, the analysis of this bit to the teachers, the analysis of this bit to the policymakers, the analysis of this bit to something else. So you end up with something a bit crazy in terms of, science, very specific, and only the variables relevant to your hypotheses are allowed to be gathered and all that sort of stuff. But for me, it ended up working. Now, I'm not doing this because I think I'm the world's greatest person at implementation science. I worked out that I needed to learn this stuff by trying to do this and discovering that I was reinventing the wheel, because there are a whole lot of people who've worked on these kind of questions for 20 years or plus. There's a whole field of research called implementation science and knowledge translation that most of us don't know about. And they've got resources available for free on the internet and a whole range of other things that we could be using to inform our practice so that we are the most effective researchers, the most effective policymakers, the most effective practitioners that we can be to serve the communities who we work with. So I think that action research is a fantastic way of saying, what's the problem? How can we tinker around with solutions to find something that really works in this context? Then what do we need to learn about how we would need to adapt this to go to the context next door and the context across the street, and really understand all the parameters that are needed to be effective. So go get them.
I think one of the problems, particularly in this part of the world, is that we don't rely so much on evidence-based programming or policy issues. To an extent that there are certain factors or determinants that override, like politics, for example. And it's a very, very key, and the nature of the politics is sometimes very poisonous. It's not knowledge-based economy, it's a politics-based economy. And that's why we have some of these challenges, crises that we have. So I don't know what we should do so as to convince some of our politicians to think in a better way, or even to convince them on issues of research, the benefits that are derived from research-based thinking.
maybe related to what he's talking about politics, there's also religion. I heard you talking about the Hindu. In Africa, you may find after certain communities, certain groups belong to certain religious groupings where they may appear like closed communities. So if possibly there has to be efforts to influence behavior change, possibly it has to be inspired by the Holy Spirit or by the leadership. Because even the Bible will say, if there's anyone who is sick or ill, they have to approach the church leaders. But then if somebody is coming from a university, which actually doesn't belong in the hierarchy of the church, bring new information which may be very helpful to them. But then, so the question is, how then do you sometimes try to break into those and try to help them? When I'm talking of this, you're talking actually of diarrheal diseases. There may be churches where when a person is ill, they mustn't actually go to hospitals or seek any form of medical of assistance from the medical services. Which then, if they do so, possibly they are excommunicated. And this year there were cases actually of somebody, of people who come from a church, who actually got involved in an accident. Then they were retrieved from that hospital by fellow church leaders, church members. So now then breaking into those and trying to suggest new innovative and perhaps very helpful strategies to help them. In as much as it may actually help them, but then the issue is, it may actually be very impossible because it goes actually against their beliefs, which are so very important to them.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Maybe to start with, I have just listened to what Doc was saying, Mr. Oh, yeah, okay. So there's this thing, the implementation science. We have to identify agents of change, as I initially said. But in Africa now, we have this aspect of culture of reticence. Like what you were saying, the culture of reticence, it affects everything. It brings about the issue of what Doc was saying, the issue of lying, whatsoever. How do you deal with this issue of culture of reticence?
Can I just make sure I understand? The culture of reticence is not putting yourself forward, not putting ideas forward?
Yes.
Humility. Politicians, the bane of our existence. Politicians have got motivators too. They've got drivers. Things like, I want to be re-elected. Things like, I'd like to be promoted in my party. Things like, I'd like to rule the world. So the more you can align the message that you need to give, the message that you think is helpful, with them achieving their goals, the more chance. It's the same thing that I'm saying over and over again. Work out who's your audience, who could make the change, what's their agenda, what are their priorities, how can you align your message to help them achieve their goals. So, if you're a politician and you are able to bring in a change that helps children to read more and their parents attribute their better reading to you, are they more or less likely to re-elect you next time? If you're able to institute an improvement in health literacy or health practice within your community that saves lives or saves disability, are you more likely to be elected or not? So it's not easy, because even when you get to the point where the politician is convinced that they would be that they would personally benefit and that they would be, that it would serve their community. Sometimes there are political constraints on their ability to speak because it's against party policy, or it will not reflect well on someone else in their party, or other sorts of things. So it's a very, very complicated problem. But often things, there are examples, most of them in the West that I know of, but that's just because that's where I come from, where people have managed to sell an idea to politicians as being in their best interest, when in fact it was really in the best interest of their constituents. And the trick is learning the skills about how to do that, about how to be a salesperson and a public relations person for ideas. I can't, you will understand that there is no, that this is a complex issue that I cannot answer in 5 minutes. But the general rule is still, what is this politician's driver? Is it to make a difference for their constituents? You go path 1. Is it for being re-elected next year? You go path 2. Is it, I've got no problem being re-elected, but I want to go up the notches in the hierarchy of my party, finding a way in which using path 3 to try to convince them that this idea has got a chance. It's one of the components that might help them to do that. So political stuff is one of the trickiest things, and I do not for a minute believe that I have got the solution. I had one very happy occurrence though. We worked out what the level of mental health distress was amongst these newly arrived refugees. We documented it. We documented scary things like suicide ideation in kids under 12. We documented it all. The group that I was working with, which was a small unit, passed it up to the Minister of Education, who did absolutely nothing with it. The next year we came back and we said, we're following the same kids, they're not getting better, and also we've got a new cohort of kids, they're showing the same pattern. Nothing happened. The third year, 6 schools in my state got $100,000 each in order to address the mental health problems of kids from refugee backgrounds who had newly arrived in South Australia. So sometimes it is just beating your head against the wall because the idea is new. And people, it's a strange thing. Why would the school be worried about mental health problems? You leave it for a year to sink in. Then you come back and you say these kids are not doing so well at school. Why? Because of their mental health problems. Oh, okay. And then the third year, someone gets the message and realises that this is part of their agenda, that they're going to end up with terrible retention rates and school performance rates, which are going to reflect upon them if they don't fix them, and suddenly it's in their responsibility. They see it as being something that they need to attend to. I don't know that I could generate that a second time, but sometimes you can be lucky. Religion. The good thing about religions is that there are many different takes on the same idea. It is not difficult to align many things that help people who are in trouble, with things that are Christian precepts, things that are precepts of Islam, things that are precepts of Buddhism. But I'm going to tell you a story about an amazing Ethiopian woman who I've had the privilege to meet. Her name is Azeb, and she's the head of the Ethiopian Women's Charitable Organisations. And her passion is reducing female genital mutilation. She has a problem because she is an Orthodox Christian, and the area where this is practiced is predominantly Muslim. And it has taken her 3 years of working within the belief system of the people she wants to work with. So she did not go to the border of Somalia and say, you've got to change genital mutilation, you've got to stop it. She went to the Quranic scholars in Addis Ababa and she said to them, is it consistent with Islam for young girls not to be circumcised? And they found all the texts, and then she mobilized these high-status Quranic scholars to go over to the border and to talk with the local imams about the fact that their understanding of the Quran may not have been as detailed and sophisticated as they would have liked, and pointed out particular passages that meant that women indeed did not need to have this done to them. And then she started talking with mothers and grandmothers, because often it's the mothers and grandmothers who are the instigators of this. And she started talking with them about the fact that their girls would still be able to get married, and that their girls would still be good Muslim girls if they did not have this done. And she took forever and ever, it's taken her 5 years. But she now has a program where girls are walking around on the border of Somalia in a definitely majority Muslim communities, wearing t-shirts on which there is a pink palm tree, because palm trees are very important. It's a symbol of strength and of a whole bunch of other things, of sanctuary, all those sorts of things, saying, if you love me, do not cut off part of my body. And it's been so powerful, because why? Because the imams were on board before she ever approached the mothers and the grandmothers. And then the grandmothers and the imam and the mothers were on board before she approached the fathers. And then the mothers, the fathers, the imams and someone else was on board before she went in and talked with the, and got the girls to advocate for their own empowerment. Now, I'm not saying that that's a way in which to address this, but women from that, young women from that community begged for help. And this was the way in which she found a way of working, and she doesn't know any implementation science, but she somehow or other worked out how she had to get the whole community on board for this before she'd be able to actually make a difference. And so she kind of naively came up with many of the principles of implementation science. It could have saved her maybe a year to have known. Cultural reticence. I'm standing up here talking in front of you, but in fact, Australians don't like loud people either. And if you put yourself forward, you're called a tall poppy. And people love to cut down tall poppies. Yep. So you need to be careful about saying you've got answers to things, or saying that you know what the problem is, or saying anything else. Yep. And it is difficult in that case. But we have some, if you're working with a Christian framework, there is always the idea of the servant leader that you can rely on. I don't know whether that's a framework that you're working within, but the idea that the person with the ideas is not putting themselves forward. They're putting forward an idea because they have an obligation to share the resources that they have in order to address the needs of the community. And it would actually be wrong of them not to provide that resource, that information, if they had access to it. It would be irresponsible and immoral. And at that point, you've kind of turned the conversation around, so it's not about that person making themselves a big person in the eyes of others. It's about them being a servant for those in need. So there are different frameworks. It depends upon what the cultural framework is that you need to work within. But there's often a way in which you can put an idea forward and not have people think he's just trying to make himself a big person. Yeah? Did that address it at all?
Yeah.
You've partly addressed it.
Dr. Linda.
Thank you, Prof. I just want to make a comment about the last issue related to the risk of people saying that you are being too forward. That I agree that it would be wrong to let issues lie by and not raise your voice when there are issues that must be attended to in the society, whether they are related to culture or anything, or related to the needs of other people that are not attended to or addressed by the society. Of course, we don't have much influence from we don't have much influence to control what people think about what we say and what we do. But looking at what Professor Julie was or is doing or was doing, that there is some time, maybe this was not the presentation that she wanted to, but the idea of being a servant to this conference made her think that this opportunity can be used effectively to discuss other issues. Sometimes we fold our arms in our society instead of raising issues that we should be raising, and that one is an immoral position that we take. And for sure people will say things, but personally I think I will always speak about things that I see. There are valid issues, the issues to raise through research and through other means, because it's also my moral commitment as a member of the society. Thank you.
Is there a member of the local organising committee who can tell me whether or not the people who are preparing lunch
I think you are still free to react to that.
I'm still free to... Okay. Dr. Linda, was there a question that I can address that was relevant to what you just contributed? Is there something I can do to follow up on that? I've been asked to fill in a little bit more time, so I'm looking for help.
Let's talk about these issues a bit more, about values. Let's talk a little bit more about this issue of values and science. I think one of the things that has evolved during my lifetime as a scientist, I was socialized to think that we did not, our goal as scientists was pure knowledge, and that policy and relevance was irrelevant. In fact, we were above that. I think we've moved far from that. But it's still, and so that just, I mean, I think that's a good thing, but now we have new problems. So now we have values that, in many ways, so I think I could say this, that there are values that I feel are absolute, like you're really not supposed to go around killing people. And then there are values that are a little bit mushy here, you know, like it's okay to kill people if it's war. Or sometimes, so how do you, and the other thing is this issue of, what did you call it, hesitance, science?
Cultural reticence.
Cultural reticence. Or like we in the US would say, not bragging about yourself. It's the same kind of thing, don't, so I think that's something actually I think we can teach ourselves how to do. I mean, I have watched people present ideas in ways that could be perceived as incredibly arrogant, but do so in a pretty acceptable way. I think that's something we can teach ourselves. This other issue about values, that's a slippery slope, and I'd like you to think about it. Talk to us a little bit about how you make that decision. So genital mutilation, for example. I mean, you know, a lot of cultures think it's terrible, and some cultures think it's just fine. Where do you go with that? I'm working in another organization looking at things like the SDGs of the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has outlined. Every single one of them are good things. The question is, how do you get to them? So I'll stop there, you get the picture. Would you like to reflect on this? So, you know, how do you get to empowerment of women and girls? You talked about that a little bit. How do you get to making that compromise between values you don't agree with and outcomes you do agree with? I guess that's the simple question. That's a simple way to put the question. Maybe you don't have to answer that. Maybe we can invite people to talk about it. How have they dealt with that when they've struggled with it? I had a very simple thing, not very value laden, but more part of my world. I work in the field of aging. And so I was initiating a whole new thing, and I wanted to call it an aging society. But the world is, I can't talk about the world, but the US is full of people who are really basically ageist. And every time I said aging, they were, and I changed it, and I thought, I started out on my high horse, wanting to convince everybody not to be ageist. But I had a whole lot of things I felt needed to be done in the field to prepare ourselves for the aging population. I changed the name of the group from the Aging Society to Society 2030. People loved it. I'm still a little embarrassed.
Before I address with that, I'm going to ask you whether I completely misinterpreted your comment. I interpret it as a culture in which reticence by individuals was seen as being valued and appropriate. But it may be that you meant that we are reticent to put our own cultures forward. Which one of those two did I misinterpret what you meant?
Thank you, Prof. Okay, I was saying, you're talking of implementation science. You were also talking of identifying agents of change.
Yes.
And Mr. Mija mentioned something to do with the religious aspect.
Yes.
And the dog behind my back mentioned something to do with lying, the context in which we are, the African context and even the Western context, taking the things from the Western context into the African context. Then I brought the issue of culture of reticence. Why? Because we as Africans, probably we don't expose how we feel as individuals, right, or even as groups. Sometimes we tend to lie, so as to cover up for the situation. So how does that not have an effect on the implementation science? Yes. And how best can we deal with this culture of reticence at large? Okay. Thank you, Prof.
I misunderstood in a version that I didn't understand. So if I understand you now, there's also reticence to say that something's wrong, for people to admit that there is a challenge in their policy making or in their community that they would like to address, that everything is not perfect.
It brings about the issue of politics.
Yes, it does, because how can a politician say we have this problem that I don't, that I would like help in addressing, that I want the community, the policymakers, the practitioners, the researchers to help us work as a nation towards a goal. So it is difficult when the community is hesitant to say that they have a problem. Policymakers are hesitant to ask for evidence to inform their policy, practitioners, etc. I think I'm running out of steam and ideas just at this point. So I don't have a ready answer to you about how you would overcome those kinds of things. I think you start with the thing that is most important for people and give them a sense of trust, that they will be respected, that the fact that they are not perfect just makes them human. Yeah? Does not make them in any way lesser. And if you can develop trust where people can share their concerns, then you have a chance of moving forward. Tony has proposed that if we have some time to fill, that we might actually stop me being the one who acts as though I have answers, and that we open it up to more people on the floor who may have faced dilemmas in their own research where there's been values that have been dearly held by the people you're trying to serve, policymakers, politicians, others, that put you in a moral dilemma, give you an ethical problem. Do I conform to patriarchal expectations? Do I have to work with a politician who I believe is corrupt in order to achieve the end for the community that would help them? So all of those sorts of things are moral dilemmas that we face as scientists. And the question is, who would like to go first in talking about either a dilemma that they've faced, a dilemma that they think the field faces, or an experience they had that they think might be instructive to someone else who's in the room? Dr. Linda, Inclusive Education, South Africa. Will now speak.
No, I used to refer to this issue as cultural competence. I'm not sure whether it is the same issue, but it means that the people that you're working with, you should have a fair understanding of the language they use, of how they address things. Maybe like I'm from the section of South Africa where when a woman, of South Africa where a woman talks to men, they have to bow down or sit down, but they cannot look them into their eyes. So if you're conducting research that involve people like that, you are a man, so you should expect that when a woman behaves in that fashion, it means that they're only showing respect, that they respect you as a man. So, and again, with reference to my study, I have been working with disabled people, students with, or former students with quadriplegia. In that field, it's very easy to make an unintended mistake. I remember at one stage there is a word that other people in the same group, they accept the word spastic. And other people in the same group from different sides, they see it as an insult to their condition. Those are some of the issues that can make researchers enemies to the people that they are researching with. So a prior understanding of those issues or of the context of the people who are involved in your study can also assist. And that's what I wanted to say. Which happened to me, yeah. But then what I did is that besides the participants, the actual participants, I used my communications with other people who have been working in the field of disability to check if this one is acceptable, if this one. And my tools before going that, I went to other people, other disabled professionals, and say, what do you think about these questions? Are they not offensive? Are they offensive? and they assisted me a lot. Thank you.
So the use of expert informants from populations who you're trying to communicate with can be very effective.
Exactly.
Thank you. I also have been working with, recently Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Malawi. We had a cyclone.
Yes.
And one of my jobs in my area, in Manicaland, has been to now work with the survivors of the cyclone. And one of the things that we have been seeing in trauma healing or trauma work is that 5 months after the cyclone, families and survivors are starting to talk about experiences of seeing their loved ones who were never discovered. They are coming back to them in the evening, in the night. They are seeing them, they are talking to the living ones, and some of them are even asking them to say, can you come and take me in this place in Mozambique, and so it has been really a very big challenge in that you are now starting to think, okay, as a psychotherapist, this must be maybe symptoms of PTSD, or this must be some kind of psychological distress that they are currently going through. But culturally, it is very much so that from a cultural perspective, in our culture, the dead people can come back and talk to you and say, I am here. Why are you leaving me here? Come and take me. I want to be buried well. So that is something that I am actually currently going through, and I am decided to really do a study to actually go there and talk to those who are experiencing their loved ones coming back, and trying to understand what is going on and be able to see how best we can help them, because it is causing a lot of anxiety, a lot of distress. Some are even scared to go and sleep. When it's night, when night is coming, they are now afraid. They are now afraid that my brother is going to come back again tonight, and I don't have any answer to tell him. So how do we balance that? That's another real challenge that we as researchers or clinicians face.
Just a brief response, and then I think there's something you want to announce. In disaster work, in humanitarian work, it is very common that between 5 and 7 months after the disaster is where you start to see the psychological symptoms most strongly. And when there is ambiguous loss, that is where the body is not discoverable, and there was always the lingering impression in people's minds, maybe they are somewhere, maybe they are hurt, maybe something is not right. Ambiguous loss is even harder to process than loss which is concrete. So the challenge that you just informed us of is one where you go, is this a culturally appropriate coping mechanism for some people, a sign of post-traumatic stress disorder for other people, and how do I know the difference? And those sorts of things are extremely culture dependent, context dependent, and you know as a clinician that one of the things that you use is this causing distress to the person or comfort? And is it something which is causing people to be less well adjusted in their everyday tasks? In Indigenous Australian cultures, in many of them, the dead linger after death and will speak to people, and hearing voices and other things is perfectly normal and to be expected. In other places, within the same indigenous cultures, it's a sign of psychotic illness. And it is indeed a very great challenge for therapists to be able to work out the difference between those two things, because not every coping strategy works for people every minute of the day. Sometimes they remain because there are some benefits, even though there are significant costs to the person as well. Yeah.
Prof is raising a very interesting issue. Is it a psychological problem in the person experiencing it, or it's really somebody coming back? That's actually a very controversial issue you are raising. Because for some people, that person is really coming back. And there is evidence for them that the person is really coming back. But for others, then that is a psychological problem in that person experiencing it. Well, we may not have answers for that for now. We are sure actually lunch delayed a bit, but now lunch is now ready. But if we talk about lunch, for those who have managed to prepare their posters, can we submit them to Ben? We want them to actually to be put on the board so that we can even discuss around them after lunch. For those which are there, I know there are some which are here for now, though we know that tomorrow there will be men, including mine. Now, in terms of lunch is now ready. So we are going out through that exit point. Then we can have lunch outside, or even we can come in and enjoy the lunch here. I can see people are now hungry. But let's actually clap hands for Prof. That's actually very interesting. We hope actually by the end of the conference we're going actually to get back to those issues. I know Dr. Mabulera, he had actually a question on this issue. I think he's arguing that it's not purely psychotic problems. Possibly the person is really coming back. Anyway, thank you. Let's actually go out for lunch for now. Bye.
Back to the afternoon session of our first day. I'm sure some people are looking at me and wondering who I am. I'm also wondering who I am. So it's okay. That's fine. I am not the one who breaks glasses, but that's fine. My name is Dr. Apanyembi. I want to welcome those who are not USET colleagues, all the colleagues. I am the Director ICT Services here at the University of Zimbabwe. That's the job which I normally go ahead and do. In the morning, unfortunately, we could not be here because there was academic committee which was happening in the morning. That's why I could also not be here. I understand it has been quite enjoyable. I've had a chance to look at some of the posters. At this juncture, I'll probably just give you one or two updates. The official opening is going to be slotted sometime tomorrow. We are working with the executive here to try and find a suitable time when they can also come in, because there are quite a number of things which are happening this week. So I am sure we are going to find a nice slot to go ahead and hopefully get our Vice Chancellor to come and do the official opening of the workshop. But without further ado, let me call on Professor Seppel to come in and lead us in this afternoon session, which is the first of our 3 poster sessions for the workshop. Professor Seppel.
Good afternoon. Am I audible? Good afternoon. Yeah. So I think many of you have already had a chance to interact with me, but my name is Robert Seppel, and I'm a professor of applied developmental psychology at the University of Zambia. where I've been for many years, and I've had the privilege of being involved with this series since the first one in 1992 with our late friend Professor Bamen Samanam. And this is now the 13th in that series, so we're very delighted that it's getting underway. And those international participants that didn't make it today, we understand will all of them be here by tomorrow. Some of them arriving later today and some of them tomorrow morning. So we're off going to be having a wonderful collection of people, and Dr. Javangi will tell you how many there are. But we feel that we shouldn't try to rush the process. Each of you who has done a poster presentation has got a lot of things you'd like to tell us about it. And these are for everybody, right? So this is part of the conference presentation, is the posters. There's some scientific or let's just say research-based knowledge is being displayed on these posters. So the idea, the format, which we've been developing over the last, I would say, decade or so, is that the author of the poster, or one of the authors, stands next to that poster, and whoever feels like it comes up and says, tell me about your poster, or they may say, let me read a bit first and then I'll ask you some questions. And in amongst those people visiting the posters will be some judges. And the panel of judges has been sort of developed in terms of people who've had a long experience with the ISSBD, who understand, you know, what the criteria sent out were, who've learnt from past experience, the sort of challenges which people face in making these. And they will meet together during the week and share ideas about the posters, and we'll come up with an agreed ranking. And we will pay attention to the fact that some of the authors are people who have got a lot of research experience, already have a PhD or are about to complete a PhD. We're calling those the doctoral level group of authors. And another group who have some experience, but not quite as much as that first group. We're calling those the master's level presenters. So we'll be taking into account what level people have reached in their studies, and that's all on file with the organizers. So all you need to do, who are not amongst the small panel of judges, is walk around, look, listen, and learn. And we will do this again tomorrow with another set of posters, and probably with a third set again on Thursday. So enjoy.
This is good. Oh, so tell me about it. Okay. I'm Miriam Campano. I'm a recent graduate in the Department of Social Work at the University of Zimbabwe. So I'm actually graduating on the 18th of September. Wow, congratulations. Thank you. So this was part of my work on my undergraduate research. It was based on resilience-related factors on academic performance among orphaned children, and I related to a case study for primary school, which is located where I stay. So I was looking at factors that might help to promote the resilience of children who are orphans, vulnerable children, particularly the orphaned children. Resilience meaning the ability to cope or to bounce back after being knocked down. So I was actually looking for...
Was there a particular context that you were looking at? Was it academic? Was it social?
It was academic.
Was it...
Yes,
Okay.
To add on to the existing body of knowledge. And, this is a topic that is not much researched in our academic, especially in Zimbabwe. It's a very rare topic. So yes, my aim was to investigate the resilience-related factors that would promote the resilience of orphaned children.
Okay.
So I used a qualitative exploratory research design, and yeah, my sampling was purposive sampling because I had to locate a group that is very difficult to locate. When you're talking about orphans, they're so specific, so you actually need to purposively select them. So yes, and I use constructive interviews with key informant.
Even if you want to remain anonymous, I think you are also going to also be considered. It's not like if you report something, they say that you have to bring your ID.
Exactly.
And tell everyone that you are the one
who reported the case.
Yeah.
That's one of the greatest fears that I encountered.
Yeah,
is that if my neighbor knows that I'm the one who reported them, then it becomes a problem and a trouble.
Yeah, so in that case, they need someone who can just report and then go to them and say, your neighbor reported you, so that they can fight because the neighbor is not reporting.
In this population between ADHD and depression, but it does not say that there are no children without both. Yes. And they are the children for whom the diagnosis is particularly troubling and difficult for clinicians. I think that it would strengthen your poster if you were able to identify whether or not there was comorbidity and what the prevalence of comorbidity was. Yeah? That doesn't mean to say that so there are different ways of looking at relationship, and the way you've done it, looking at are there differences in prevalence, is absolutely appropriate to your research question. Yeah? I'm not saying that you did the wrong analysis or anything else, but in terms of if you sell me the story that the reason why we need to look for this association is that it's difficult to diagnose comorbidity, then I'm expecting you to draw a conclusion about comorbidity. Either you need a different lead-in to why you're doing the study, or you need to make the link back to comorbidity. So your presentation is like a circle. Yeah. So you start.
Their culture is different from the other places. You go there, you see people from Lawayo, people from Sahara, when they go to Mashuga, some of them they struggle adjusting to that reserved community that they are in. So these are some of the causes that we found out. Then academic challenges, obviously, struggling from A level coming down to university studies. That can be pressure when you're getting there. They tell you that you can fail a module, then you have to retake the module. It's not easy for some children. The pressure there, even at home, the expectation at home, I think that you must definitely pass, and even the expectations of the child themselves, that they're betting, that they're building on themselves, that definitely have to pass university. That can be what a cause of depression. Then the social relationship there, we're looking at the versatile issues like dating. Dating is contributing so much to depression nowadays. We're looking at even social media, where we say Facebook, Twitter, the insults that you get from Twitter, insults that you get from Facebook, you can actually lead a person to organization, if not money. So those are some of the findings that you have with the causes. Then we go to the effectiveness of student counseling. Okay, from our research, you find that in as much as universities are proud that they have student counseling services, most of the students, especially our first year students, they really don't know what the facilities are, one, and they don't know who offer the facilities too. So even if you go there and advertise and preach that go to the counseling services, when the people don't know what you're talking about, it's hard really to go there. So most students, they are crippled by that. They just know that they are counseling service, but where do they attend the counseling service? It's not specified. In most cases, the research found that people actually gain counseling service when they actually attend clinical services. And the doctor can see or can diagnose a client and see that maybe this person is more of a psychological problem than a physical problem. For example, the headaches, things like that. So the doctor can diagnose and say, you know what, I think you should talk to someone. Let me call someone for you who has counseling skills. That's how they get most of the counseling. But having
everyone. But in terms of implementation, you can check. There are so many studies from South Africa that are written about the challenges that teachers have in class in terms of implementing this inclusion. There are so many. Most of them are focusing on the challenges experienced by teachers in primary in primary schools. So, but currently there are studies that are coming out about disabled people in higher education, which means there is some progress, because if there were no disabled students in higher education, we wouldn't have any of these studies. Though most of them are talking about less successful stories. So we have to challenge that narrative and see implementation of inclusive education in action. This one I was also shocked because there was someone who was also a participant here as a chartered accountant, qualified chartered accountant. So then we cannot say that it was the university, but she was coming from a background that supported her, you understand. And another one is a qualified magistrate. I got him as another one is a politician, qualified. Another one is a teacher with an honors degree. Another one has got BTech in agriculture. So all these people have struggled, but through ODL route to make qualifications for themselves.
Because in most cases, there is no point where you actually get counseling. It is mostly the case. But I think as a
so it's
discipline,
it's a mode of learning where students learn at a distance. They can stay at home and do. It was all correspondence.
So is it like internet?
No.
We're saying that depression,
students currently, most of these institutions, just like UNISA, the University of South Africa is one of them, students don't have classes.
No students in classes?
No classes. They register, they buy study material, they only communicate with their lecturers through maybe telephone. Currently there are forums, portals that they use, online discussion with their lecturers. That's how they mitigate for the physical separation. But the hallmark of open distance learning is that there is physical separation between the institution and the student. Yeah, but
so is that university only open distance learning, or do they just offer some open distance learning courses?
In South Africa there is one which is a dedicated open distance learning, which means no classes. And then there is about 3 or 4 that combine classes and also, yes. We, like where I'm working, we are moving towards having courses that we provide online, purely online. Some of them, but then we consider that taking that route purely online will also disadvantage other students. So we combining the two.
Well, from doing these courses is our first time really. So we felt probably we don't need to include everything because it becomes so congested. It's already congested.
No, not everything, but for example, starting here.
Quotes is in direct quotations or?
Yeah, starting the abstract here. Then you have more space, so the bigger section
is on the results. Okay, what people were saying.
Then emotional support.
Okay.
Okay. Or whatever. Quotes that support.
That support. Not by their parents. Actually, I live those ones now.
So I compare it to those parents who will not
What's the prevalence of HIV?
When I checked, it was about 80% as compared to 40 now, 40 for national prevalence.
Okay, yeah.
So it's really high.
Yeah.
how did you collect this?
Really appreciate it very much for the comments.
I'm so keen to the festival.
Hello. Yes, this is a study that was conducted in substitute and research for the mobility of the primary school children.
Very much affecting people doing research concerning the
Yes, there's a group in the Popo that you are doing. It's like a project we're doing. We just find topics in this like depression, executive function, children's agency.
and how are you in case you find that the situation is how are you?
Normally we refer, yes, like I'm working in the hospital. If you find that I'm at the school and then I realize that I'm having problems with ADHD, the teachers will tell me that these learners are having problems. And then we start with the screening and then do thorough examination and then after that
Do the parents pay
in the hospital?
Government is responsible for payment?
No, the government doesn't do anything. The parents will bring the child to the hospital, and then if the hospital say they must pay, but the money is not too much, something like 50 rand, 60 rand, and then for the consultation. Remember, before we screen them, we'll have to, they must come for consultation and then we start screening.
And are you following up like as you said primary school? For those that leave primary yet they are still under the same condition, do you like follow up until they're in high school, university, or it's just a research on primary school?
Like with my study, it was like focusing on primary, but we have realized that there's a need because like initially ADHD was not diagnosed in adults. Remember, it was diagnosed to children and then you don't have to diagnose it with adults. But nowadays, since the inception of the DSM-5, we are diagnosing ADHD in adults. So there's a need for us to do more studies and do more research or do more follow-ups on those children, especially those that we have seen before.
All right, and how are you spreading these news of yours to the rest of Africa? Are you spreading it like to other countries? It's just specific, it's a program for South Africa.
The teachers, because there were certain behaviors which I observed during the process. And I did take note of them, then just prepared that observation guide. So some of them, they came through.
So I understood now how you approached what you mean by these tools. Now, your aspects, you mentioned these in different domains. This is your pies again, right?
Yeah.
So behavioral challenges,
yes.
Resources, adaptation, identity crisis. So at some point, what this information you collected with these tools from these people gave you an interpretation of what's going on. And this is basically summarized here, right?
Okay, what I did was, when I collected my data, I coded it. And I used the format by, I don't remember the name, but it's like I just coded it in memory. We were calling coding it memoing of data. Then after memoing it, I produced themes, major themes. And this was the major, these were the major themes, yeah, which I arrived at. So it was more of a thematic analysis, but there was more of coding and the memory of data.
Yes. Have you heard of this notion of grounded theory?
Grounded theory, yeah.
Because it sounds in a way a mix, this study. Part of it you've got actually a theory you came in with, which is the Bowlby-Ainsworth sort of attachment is a necessity for healthy human development, and the Erickson's theory of crises as children grow up and so on.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you're saying I didn't elicit data specifically to address those theoretical ideas. What I did was I said, talk to me about this child. I purposefully selected children who seemed to have a problem, and then I talked to the adults who knew them and gave them open-ended questions, and using what we would then say is like a ground from the ground up, I generated these interpretations. So it's a little bit of both, right?
Yes.
You were generically inspired by those theories, but then you developed your own interpretation from the bottom up.
What I did was, on these theories, they helped me. They were the big ball. Let me use the word big ball. To some sort of an application. Do they apply? For example, a child having a secure attachment, does it apply to our own environment? To this environment, especially considering the body frame as much of it. How does it apply? Is it necessary, or else it was just a Western view of what situation? That was my perspective. So I think the moment you're bringing the issue of grounded here, I think it works. Yes, that is the implementation stage which we are talking about.
But as a researcher, the challenge is how do you justify your interpretation of what they told you relative to possible other interpretations? If you take a very strong top-down theoretical position, like you say, I'm going to try and test Bowlby and Ainsworth's attachment theory, right? Then, for instance, we would want to know what was going on early in these children's lives. You haven't told us what age they are, but they're presumably well over 7, right? Because they're at school.
Let me say it's like this parents, they do send
this the communities of practice. There are patterns for people of the same practice, people of the same extent who are interested in a particular area. So the communities of practice are actually helpful in knowledge management. People learn a lot from each other, transfer knowledge. The lecturers should be encouraged to attend the ICTS training because one thing which emerged was that even in the ICTS department, calls for training, suppose they are introducing something new. The lecturers don't attend those trainings, but they will be asked to implement some of those changes. I don't know if it is common also in your institution. And further research on academics, including research fellows and teaching assistants, because this study focused on lecturers only. It left out some teaching assistants, or we call them tutorial assistants, and it also left out research fellows. Then we also want this study to include the Faculty of Medicine, because our Faculty of Medicine is off campus. It is at Imperial Hospital. This study didn't include the Faculty of Medicine because of time management and resources. We want to move how we're going to other. So that's the study. Any questions? Jacqueline, during my days in the high school teacher, I stick with the rise and the fall on your books every time. For not asking questions.
Okay, so I'm just interested in the problem statement. What is it that you're trying to solve? What's your problem statement? Without reading what I just want to try and get a better understanding.
Yeah, okay, there are other things which we left out, but they are covered somehow, like cultural factors. But anyway, the problem statement is that the ICTs which are there are not assisting lecturers in sharing their knowledge, in managing their knowledge. So that is what we were focusing on, because this study was about ICT. and knowledge management. Because anecdotal evidence from myself as the lecturer and the student who was conducting this study is that people who work with the academics themselves, they seem not to be comfortable using the available ICTs. And the ICTs which are available, they are outdated. Like, for instance, the computers, they are still using desktops. Yes.
Okay, so, and the whole point of doing the study was
to establish the ICTs which are available, and also to see how those ICTs are used, the purposes of managing the academics knowledge.
They were seeing it, they were pained by it, but they did not take action. So I was trying to then investigate, the study actually aimed to investigate how perhaps we could actually alleviate such circumstances, such issues by developing ways of integrating social media into programming of these organizations. If people perhaps can then, already when we're discussing, somebody just sends a message on WhatsApp to report this case, maybe it would be easier because we are more often than not on WhatsApp than we would take a phone to actually call or physically go into a police station and report. Maybe this brings the strategies of reporting closer to home because most of us are using social media. Most of us are on WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter. So from the interviews that I conducted, the results that were shown were that one, social media is already being used by these organizations, even though no policies exist to guide this integration. People are already using social media to report child abuse cases. But what then happens is only when somebody personally knows that you work for Childline, knows that you work for, I don't know, some other organization that works with children, then they send to you and then actually beg that you don't include their name. I know you work for Childline, please do something about this, but please don't put my name in it. So people are already using WhatsApp to report child abuse cases. So why can it not then be integrated and be made official, encourage people to also use WhatsApp to report and to ask questions that they may have about what child abuse is and what can be done to alleviate the cases that they are privy to, that they are witnessing in their communities. Child protection workers are also utilizing WhatsApp to communicate with the cases that they've been allocated. It actually makes it easier for them because most youths are already on WhatsApp. It makes it easier for them because of resource constriction. They don't have the resources to visit as they are supposed to. Social workers, child protection workers are supposed to visit the cases on a frequent and regular basis, maybe weekly visits. But sometimes because of the resources, fuel is expensive, the cars are not even there, it makes it difficult for them to actually do this. So WhatsApp would actually bridge the gap when they are not able to visit their cases. At least they're able to communicate with them in case there's something that they need to share in that period which they are not able to visit them. Then the challenges that are, or the risks that are associated are mainly to do with the security of the information that is shared via social media. How safe am I if I'm going to report using WhatsApp? Where's the WhatsApp? I've got my number, so you can contact me and I can be identified. How safe is it for me to use social media to report the cases that I've identified? And how do we maintain anonymity in that case? Meaning that there's a lot to do with ethics that is involved in the integration of social media in programming. Just like if you're going to have a counseling session with someone, you know them, you see them, you know their details, but still confidentiality can still be observed. So it is the same idea with the social media, it can still be done. Then the recommendations of the study. First of all, it recommends for the study. We're saying this is the side of the professional workers, but what of the community members themselves? We've heard the side of the community, of the professionals, and we are in agreement. Myself, my thoughts and what they were saying were in agreement. But what guarantee do we have that the community members will take up this initiative to integrate social media? We may do all these, develop policies, but no one will utilize it because of other challenges we may not have seen. So a study that looks at community members is also an important one. True organizations should actively integrate social media platforms in their programming to reap the benefits that have been identified of social media. They should also develop policies to make sure that this integration is safe and protects the rights of the children, the rights of the community members who will choose to report blah blah blah.
Feels like everyone is this poor. No, somehow. I'm not saying everyone is this poor. No, good houses. I actually say low density houses, good stands and everything. But there are others, shabby shelters, just they don't even have house numbers. There are no house numbers. If you go via this or something like that, that's where you get to my house. So when choosing as well about the area, you should choose where you get private space. But doesn't necessarily mean those houses, they're the only ones orphans, even those nice ones. They have a So there are so many factors which you have to be so that you come up with something to be concrete. Anyway, so very soon you'll be doing university.
I told you the same thing. This is confirmation. True.
Thank you.
That's
so
confirmation.
Easy for me to find the headings by using colour. Great idea. Yep. The heading, all the rest of it. But making, most of his seems to go, because you've only got 300 words. Yep. Okay. So I'm just going to make some notes. I'm going to go to the poor people next door. Thank you.
We've never been. Actually, last time I did.
Maybe Mambo dito PM jivaji propose.
Sorry. You are saying, she was saying that when you're looking at poster presentation, you don't need to have all this right now. But it should be almost like an oral thing. So it would be important like have more visual rather than my write-ups like this. A good example of what she was saying was, for example, you are talking of key results here. Instead of listing them down, probably you can have a diagram, where you have, let's say, a circle in between key results, and you have other circles fitting in where you say emotional support, what, and everything should amount to not more than 300 words. You can imagine the whole process.
So it's about pictorial representation.
Yeah, which is more visual, which was taken of view. And that is not needed. She also talked of the theoretical framework, which I didn't put in here. Theoretical framework, she was saying it's very important, it's very necessary, because when you look at it right now, it would be like something that is only beneficial to the Zimbabwean community.
Nobody's asking me anything. Unless if you want to ask me something about the poster. Okay, so you wait until somebody comes and then. But for now, nobody's asking me anything.
Oh, sorry. Take us through. Sorry for disturbing.
Right, it's all right.
Can you take us through?
Okay. I'm from Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education. So this is basically, it was in an effort to promote access to quality education for children with ADHD in various units in the district of Makunda. So we're looking at positive reinforcement with just trying to evaluate its effectiveness in reducing off-task behaviors. So the major objectives were to examine the effectiveness of rewards inclusive, because those were the targeted off-task behaviors. They were the most complained about behaviors. So they were hence targeted behaviors. So that's out of seat behavior, shouting and interacting, and grabbing behaviors. So yes, positive reinforcement, but positive reinforcement basically there was verbal reinforcement, that is the like, and then there was the token economy, board stickers, the backup instances to the token economy. It included extra time on the computer. There was a merit page which is highly esteemed at that school. Yes, and extra break time. Those were the backup.
How did you screen for ADHD?
We use psychological tests.
What's the prevalence?
Like in this district, in Makonde district, we have 6 resource units for children with ADHD. In fact, they are not for children with ADHD, but they are for children with intellectual disabilities. But that's where we place children with ADHD. So it's an average of 3 in every class. Yeah. So basically, that's what I was.
Are they on treatment?
No, they are not on treatment. It was just the behavioral intervention. They are not on by treatment. I think you are talking about the medical. Yeah, no, they are not.
Okay. What was the outcome?
The outcome. This was a master's in
So the sampling technique that I used the yes, purposive. Why purposive? Because I target the respondents of professional contributions. I went to yes, private hospital,
And they referred patients, or they were the participants?
No, they were professionals that gave me some information on how they worked with some patients.
So you had some expert informants?
Yes,
Right.
yes,
Okay.
yes. Then I also used snowball sampling. Snowball sampling or referral sampling helped me to select the participants. Initially, I had targeted 12 of them, but due to the problems, the debilitating problems
it would be difficult for them to participate.
2 of them did not turn up.
Yes.
So I ended up working with 10. However, it was a good number for a qualitative research. So this is a picture for a survivor after mastectomy. Now the breast has been removed because it is affected, and that's where some of the issues come from. Do I still hold that stature that I used to have before this was removed? Those are the concerns, some of the concerns that they go through. I also used, the data gathering instrument that I used semi-structured interviews with the support of an interview guide. Why this work? Because it would help me to get more information from the breast cancer survivors.
In their own voice?
Yes, in their own voice. Yes, yes.
It's a set of words you can use.
Yes, yes. And the experiences. And during that time, I also had to make some observations as I talked to them, because it's a very sensitive area.
Using
Outcomes of
I wanted to get
research.
some information there. So the results showed that most of the caregivers actually need
But for the sake of this poster presentation, I only gave 3 of them:
but there are
anxiety,
also many challenges
fear,
where you find that
depression.
the carers
They are
usually
always in
are
fear. Why?
themselves also infected
Because
by HIV.
after, for
You
example,
find some of the
mastectomy,
carers will be
it's
spouses
like
of
they fear recurrence.
And usually the relationship that is created,
Yes, I'm going through medication,
such
but
that there's a lot of
may
blame. But at the same time, you need to care for the one whom you think
experience social
probably
challenges,
has also infected you.
like
So
poor
this becomes a
adjustment
challenge.
to gender
But though
and
there were those challenges
professional
which
roles,
can be so
right?
emotional
Some of them,
and
they are
things like
married.
that,
Now
they
this
also
is
found out that
removed.
there was
How is my husband going to respond? Yes, at work, what are they saying about me?
Some
right?
of the
Then
caregivers felt that there was a
they've
reward
got some roles that they perform at home as a mother.
Because
Now you
they
are
felt
weak,
that they were
you are
doing
not
something
well.
to
Usually when
enhance
this breast is removed,
within
you
that
find
person
that they've got
whom
some
they are
problems here.
caring for.
I've
So
got
it's not always
one
that
of my participants who said I used to
they
be
felt
a
they
cross-border
had caring for
trader,
someone.
carrying some heavy luggage, try and
So
wake for my
this-
children,
this
but
I
now
tried
I
to also
can't.
highlight
It's painful.
some of
Yes.
the